They say grief is a hole in your heart, but for me, it was a lock on a front door I no longer had the key to. My daughter, Maya, wasn't even cold in the ground before her husband, Andre, decided my inheritance was his new playground. He didn't just move in, he moved his other life in, and he thought a 60-year-old woman was too broken to kick back. He's about to find out that when you lose everything, you've got nothing left to fear and everything to burn. Before we get into how I turned his dream home into a living nightmare, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You're watching Vintage Vengeance, where the payback is always served at room temperature. Drop a Team Mama in the comments if you believe family shouldn't have to fight for what's theirs. I stood on the sidewalk of the cul-de-sac, staring at the $920,000 colonial house. It was a masterpiece of glass and stone that my Maya had built with her own sweat and brilliance. She told me, "Ma, if anything happens to me, this is your sanctuary." Well, something happened. A sudden accident on a rain-slicked road. Now, looking through the massive bay window, I didn't see my daughter's taste. I saw a strange woman, younger, louder, tossing a silk scarf over Maya's favorite antique chair. I saw Andre, the man who used to call me Mom, pouring expensive scotch and laughing with two men I'd never seen before. They weren't just living there. They were colonizing it. "Can I help you, Mrs. Gable?" Andre's voice startled me. He had stepped onto the porch, looking smug in a cashmere sweater Maya had bought him. "I came to collect the jewelry and the journals, Andre," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my soul. He leaned against the doorframe, blocking the entrance. "The lawyer said the house and everything inside is under contested status. Until then, I have to maintain the property. It's better if you don't come around. It's upsetting Tiana." "Tiana?" I asked. "My fiancé," he said, the word cutting through me like a serrated blade. "We're starting fresh. Maya would have wanted me to be happy." I looked him dead in the eye. The betrayal wasn't just the house. It was the fact that he had Tiana picked out while my daughter was still breathing. He didn't want the money. He wanted the life Maya built without Maya in it. "You're right, Andre," I whispered, a cold clarity settling over me. "Maya would want you to get exactly what you deserve, and I'm going to make sure of that." He chuckled, a nasty, dismissive sound. "Go home, Ruby. Get some rest. You're getting old." As I walked back to my car, I didn't cry. I didn't call a lawyer. I reached into my pocket and felt the spare key I'd never told him about, the one Maya hid in a hollowed-out stone by the garden gate. He thought I was a grieving grandmother. He forgot I was the woman who raised the lioness he'd just betrayed. The fresh start he wanted was about to become a funeral for his reputation, his sanity, and his very skin. The night air was thick, heavy, with the scent of blooming jasmine and the underlying stench of betrayal. I didn't park in the driveway. No, I left my old sedan 3 blocks over and walked through the wooded path that lined the back of the property. I knew every inch of this land. I'd helped Maya pick the plot. I'd watched the foundation be poured. Andre thought he owned this place because his name was on a marriage license, but the dirt beneath my feet knew better. I reached the garden gate and knelt by the large, jagged limestone rock Maya, and I had joked was our secret vault. My fingers brushed against the cold stone, and I felt the familiar notch. I flipped it over, and there it was, the spare key. It felt heavy in my palm, a piece of cold steel that held the power to reclaim my life. I didn't go to the front door. Andre had likely installed those fancy doorbell cameras to impress Tiana. Instead, I crept toward the detached garage at the far end of the breezeway. The side door creaked just a hair, a sound that made my heart hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Steady, Ruby," I whispered to myself. "You aren't a thief. You're the owner." The garage was cavernous, smelling of expensive wax and motor oil. Andre's new Italian sports car sat in the center, gleaming like a predator in the dark. But my eyes went to the back, behind a heavy floor-to-ceiling tarp. Andre had told me Maya's car was totaled beyond recognition and hauled off to a scrap yard hours after the crash. He'd said it was too painful for me to see. I grabbed the edge of the tarp and pulled. The silver SUV sat there, crumpled like a discarded soda can. The front end was smashed, but the cabin was mostly intact. My breath hitched. I could still see a strand of Maya's hair caught in the cracked windshield. My vision blurred, but I forced myself to stay sharp. Why would he keep it? Why lie about the scrap yard? I reached into my bag and pulled out a high-powered tactical light. I wasn't just a grieving mother. Before I retired, I spent 20 years as a lead inspector for the Transit Authority. I knew how machines worked. I knew how they failed. And more importantly, I knew when they were helped along. I crawled under the chassis, ignoring the protest of my 60-year-old joints. I focused my light on the brake lines. My stomach did a slow, nauseating roll. The lines hadn't snapped from the impact. They were clean, diagonal cuts, the kind made by a pair of heavy-duty snips. "You coward." I hissed, the words tasting like copper in my mouth. Suddenly, the garage lights hummed and flickered to life. I froze, pressed against the oily concrete. "I told you, Tiana, the insurance hasn't cleared the wreck yet." Andre's voice boomed as he entered from the breezeway. "Once the check hits, I'll have this junk hauled away, and we can put your indoor gym here." "It's just creepy, Andre," a high, nasal voice replied. That had to be Tiana. "Why keep your dead wife's car in the same house where we're trying to build a future? It's bad energy. Energy doesn't pay for that diamond on your finger. Baby," Andre chuckled. I heard the sound of a car door opening. His sports car. Besides, the accident was a blessing in disguise. We've got the house, we've got the equity, and pretty soon, the old lady will be too tired to keep fighting. She's already losing her mind. I stayed deathly still, the cold metal of Maya's ruined car pressing against my shoulder. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It had turned into a cold, hard stone. He didn't just want the $920,000 house. He had murdered my only child to get it. He didn't know I was 3 feet away. He didn't know I had the evidence. And he certainly didn't know that the old lady was about to stop playing by the rules of a world that let men like him breathe. The garage lights died as Andre and Tiana retreated back into the warmth of the house. I stayed in the shadows for a long time, the smell of grease and malice clinging to my skin. My daughter's blood was on those brake lines, and the man she loved was currently upstairs, probably toast-ing to his own cleverness. He thought he'd disposed of the evidence by hiding it in plain sight, assuming I was too frail or too stupid to look. I didn't leave. Instead, I moved toward the back of the garage to a small, unassuming wooden panel behind a stack of storage bins. When we built this place, Maya had insisted on a secret basement suite, a panic room of sorts that doubled as a climate-controlled cellar. Andre knew about the cellar, but he didn't know about the secondary access point through the garage's ventilation shaft. I squeezed through the narrow opening. My body ached, but the adrenaline acting as my fuel was more potent than any medicine. I descended the ladder into the darkness of the sub-basement. This area was connected to the home's main HVAC and security hub. It was the brain of the house, and I was the fever about to take hold. I pulled out my phone and synced it to the house's smart system. Maya had given me administrative access years ago, just in case. Andre had changed the main passwords, but he hadn't wiped the secondary recovery accounts. He wasn't as smart as he looked in those cashmere sweaters. I sat in the dark, watching the heat maps of the house on my screen. 2 glowing figures were in the master bedroom. My daughter's bedroom. Let's see how well you sleep tonight, Andre, I whispered. At 2:14 a.m., I began the first phase. I didn't do anything loud. Loud is easy to explain away. I went to the vent controls and adjusted the dampers. I began to cycle the air in the master suite, just enough to create a low, rhythmic whistling sound, like a woman humming in a distant room. Then, I accessed the smart speakers in the kitchen. I played a recording of a sound Andre should have recognized, the specific jingle of Maya's keys hitting the granite countertop. Clink, jingle, silence. Through the vents, I heard a muffled thump, a door opening. Tiana, did you hear that? Andre's voice drifted down, tight and thin. Hear what? Go back to sleep, Dre, she groaned. I heard her keys. I know that sound. You're stressed. It's just the house settling. It's a big place. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. Then I triggered the smart fridge to dispense a single, solitary ice cube. It clattered into the tray with a hollow crack. In the silence of a $920,000 house, every tiny sound is a gunshot. I heard his footsteps on the hardwood, heavy, hesitant. He was coming downstairs. I moved to the monitors. He was standing in the kitchen, holding a flashlight like a weapon, staring at the empty counter where Maya used to keep her purse. He looked haggard in the blue light of the refrigerator. Good. I reached for the intercom system. I didn't speak. I simply breathed, a slow, ragged intake of air, mimicking the way Maya sounded after her morning runs. The sound piped directly into the kitchen speaker, barely audible, just a whisper of a ghost. Andre jumped, nearly dropping his light. Who's there? Ruby? Is that you? I didn't answer. I cut the feed. I wanted him to wonder. I wanted the seeds of doubt to sprout into a forest of paranoia. He thought he had inherited a fortune. He didn't realize he had moved into a trap, and I was the one holding the remote. He went back upstairs, but the heat map showed him pacing for hours. He wasn't a king in his castle anymore. He was a prisoner in a glass cage, and I was just getting started. By the third night, the tension in the house was thick enough to choke on. Andre was vibrating with nerves, but Tiana was the weak link. She was young, superficial, and clearly only in love with the square footage and the status. She didn't have the stomach for what was coming. If Andre was the brain of this betrayal, Tiana was the ego, and I was going to bruise it until it turned black and blue. I watched through the hidden camera feeds as Tiana sat at Maya's vanity. She was preening, applying a thick layer of expensive cream, and humming a tune that Maya used to love. It made my blood boil to see her using my daughter's brushes, sitting in my daughter's chair, acting like she had earned this luxury. I waited until she stepped into the walk-in closet to pick out her outfit for their celebratory dinner. I moved quickly through the service passage, a narrow corridor behind the master bath used for plumbing access. I reached the back of the vanity mirror. It was a high-end, two-way piece Maya had installed for aesthetic lighting. With a steady hand, I slid a small, high-resolution transparency between the glass layers. It was a photo of Maya, not a happy one. It was the photo from her ID, the one where her eyes looked like they were piercing right through you. I retreated and waited. Tiana walked back to the vanity. She sat down, picked up a lipstick, and leaned in close. I hit the backlighting trigger on my phone. The image of Maya's face shimmered into view, superimposed over Tiana's own reflection. It looked like Maya was standing directly behind her, staring at her neck. "Ah!" Tiana screamed, the sound tearing through the quiet house. She scrambled backward, tripping over a velvet ottoman and crashing into a floor-length mirror. "Tiana! What? What happened?" Andre burst into the room, his face pale and sweat beaded. "She's in the glass. I saw her. Maya was right there. Tiana was hyperventilating, pointing a trembling finger at the vanity. Andre rushed over, but I had already killed the backlight. The photo vanished into the shadows of the frame. There's nothing here, Tiana. You're seeing things. You've been listening to those true crime podcasts again. I am not crazy, Andre. She was looking at me. She looked angry. It's just the lighting, Andre snapped, though I saw his own hands shaking as he adjusted his collar. The wiring in this place is acting up. I'll call an electrician tomorrow. No, Tiana yelled. I don't want an electrician. I want to leave. This house feels like a tomb. And why do you have that car in the garage? I went down there to get my yoga mat, and I saw it. You said it was gone. You lied to me. Andre's face hardened. He grabbed her arm, a little too tight. I told you, it's for the insurance. Don't go in the garage. Stay out of things that don't concern you. Everything concerns me if I'm living here, she shouted, shaking him off. You're acting weird. The house is acting weird. And I feel like I'm being watched. She was right. She was being watched by the grandmother she'd dismissed as a non-factor. I leaned back against the cold pipes in the crawl space, a grim smile touching my lips. The crack in their foundation was widening. Andre wasn't just fighting a ghost now. He was fighting the woman he'd brought into his stolen kingdom. He was starting to realize that you can't build a life on top of a grave without the occupant eventually reaching up to pull you down. The house was cold, but the air inside the walls was freezing. I was tucked away in the narrow space behind the library bookshelves, a spot Maya and I had designed for a hidden safe. Now, it was my observation post. Andre was pacing the floor below, his footsteps heavy and uneven. He wasn't the polished, arrogant man I'd seen on the porch days ago. He looked unraveled. He had a guest, a man named Silas. I'd never seen him before, but he didn't look like a lawyer or an insurance adjuster. He wore a suit that cost more than my car, but he carried himself like a man who enjoyed the sight of blood. You're behind schedule, Andre, Silas said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. The money was supposed to be laundered through the sale of this property by the 1st of the month. I know, Andre stammered. I could hear the ice clinking in his glass. He was drinking heavily now. But the old woman is making things difficult. She's sniffing around. And the house, there's something wrong with the house. Silas let out a dry, mocking laugh. The house is a pile of bricks and glass. The only thing wrong is your spine. My associates don't care about bad vibes or grieving mothers. They care about their 20 million. You promised this estate would be the perfect front. If you don't close this deal, you aren't just losing the house. You're losing your life. My heart stopped. 20 million? This wasn't just about a $920,000 inheritance. Andre had been using Maya's business and this property to move money for a criminal organization. Maya must have found out. That's why the brake lines were cut. She wasn't just a wife he wanted to replace. She was a whistleblower he had to silence. I need more time to fix the accident records, Andre pleaded. If the title doesn't transfer cleanly, the feds will flag the transaction. You have 48 hours, Silas said, his tone turning ice cold. After that, we stop talking to you and start talking to the people you're afraid of. And believe me, Andre, they don't use lawyers. They use shovels. The front door slammed shut, leaving Andre in a deafening silence. I heard him throw his glass against the fireplace. The shards sprayed against the stone, the same stone Maya had picked out because it felt like home. Damn it, he screamed. Where is that paperwork? He began tearing through the library desks, throwing files and drawers onto the floor. He was looking for the original deed and the forged will he'd been hiding. He didn't realize that I'd already moved them. I had reached through the back of the cabinet hours ago and swapped the real documents for a set of blank pages. I watched him through the gap in the shelving, He looked pathetic. This was the man who thought he could outplay me? He was just a small-time crook who had stepped into a world of giants, and he was about to get stepped on. But I wasn't going to let the syndicate have him yet. If Silas killed him, it would be too quick. Andre needed to feel the walls closing in. He needed to feel the same terror Maya felt when she pressed her foot on the pedal and felt nothing but empty air. I picked up my phone and sent a localized text message to his device, masking the ID, so it appeared as Maya. The message was simple. The brakes aren't the only thing that's broken, Andre. Look under the rug. I watched him pull his phone from his pocket. His face went gray, then a sickly shade of green. He dropped the phone as if it had turned into a viper. He looked down at the expensive Persian rug in the center of the room, the one covering the trapdoor to the very cellar I was hiding in. His eyes went wide. He was starting to realize that the ghost in his house wasn't a spirit. It was a reckoning. Andre stared at the rug like it was a hungry mouth waiting to swallow him whole. He didn't move for 5 minutes. He just stood there, his breath coming in ragged, wet gasps. He was waiting for the floor to open, waiting for Maya to crawl out, waiting for the universe to make sense again. But I wasn't going to give him the luxury of logic. I retreated deeper into the sub-basement toward the secondary water filtration system Maya had installed. It was a state-of-the-art setup designed to keep the house self-sufficient. I had spent the last few hours preparing a special blend. It wasn't poison. I didn't want him dead by my hand. It was a concentrated extract of certain organic compounds, the kind that heightens sensory perception until every shadow looks like a monster and every whisper sounds like a scream. I bypassed the main line and injected the solution into the master suite's plumbing. "Wash away your sins, Andre," I whispered, turning the valve. Upstairs, I heard the shower start. He was trying to wash off the sweat, trying to scrub away the terror Silas had instilled in him. But as the steam filled that marble bathroom, he wasn't just breathing in water vapor. He was inhaling a waking nightmare. I switched the house's smart lighting to maintenance mode. This caused the LEDs to flicker at a specific low-frequency pulse, barely noticeable to the conscious mind, but scientifically proven to induce a sense of profound unease and nausea. Then I opened the intercom. I didn't use Maya's voice this time. I used the sound of the crash. I played a loop of screeching tires and twisting metal, but I slowed it down by 400%. It became a low, guttural moan that vibrated through the very framing of the house. Through the cameras, I saw Andre stumble out of the shower, dripping wet and clutching his head. He looked at the steam-covered mirror. I had wiped a message into the glass earlier with a specialized hydrophobic solution. As the steam hit it, words appeared as if being written by an invisible hand. I felt the impact. "No, no, no, no!" Andre roared, swinging his fist at the mirror. The glass shattered, cutting his knuckles. He didn't even seem to feel the pain. He was staring at his own reflection in the shards, his eyes dilated, his skin sallow. The compounds were working. His brain was misfiring, turning the flickering lights into shifting shadows and the low-frequency humming into the screams of the woman he'd murdered. Tiana burst into the room, her suitcase already packed. She looked at Andre, bloody, naked, and screaming at a wall, and her face contorted in disgust and horror. "I'm done, Andre. You're on drugs or you're losing it, and I am not staying in this house another minute," she yelled. "You can't leave." Andre lunged for her, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. "The money—" "Silas, we have to stay." "There is no we," she screamed, dodging his grasp. "You're talking to ghosts and hiding wrecked cars in the garage. You're a loser, Andre. A pathetic, murderous loser." She ran for the stairs. I helped her along by disengaging the electronic locks on the front door. She flew out into the night, her tires screeching as she fled the nightmare. Andre collapsed on the landing of the grand staircase, the $920,000 house echoing with his sobbing. He was alone now. No fiancé to hide behind. No lawyers to lie for him. Just him, the shadows I created, and the crushing weight of the 48-hour clock Silas had started. I watched him from the monitor, my face illuminated by the cold blue light. "The house is empty now, Andre," I said into the dead air. "Just you and me, and I've got all night." The silence that followed Tiana's departure was more deafening than her screams. Andre lay curled on the landing, a broken man in a bespoke house. He was shivering, his skin reacting to the compounds in the air, his mind spinning a web of terror that I had woven for him. It was time to stop being a ghost. It was time to be the consequence. I climbed out of the service panel in the hallway, moving with a grace that surprised even me. I didn't need to hide anymore. The cameras were looped, the doors were deadbolt from my master override, and the world outside didn't exist. I walked down the stairs, my soft-soled shoes making no sound on the mahogany. Andre was staring at the floor, muttering Maya's name over and over. I stopped 3 steps above him. "She can't hear you, Andre," I said, my voice low and cold as a winter grave. He jolted, his head snapping up so fast I heard his neck crack. His eyes were bloodshot, pupils blown wide. He scrambled backward on his elbows until he hit the banister. "Ruby? How? How did you get in here?" "The locks, the security. I built this house, Andre. Did you really think a few digital codes could keep me out of my own heart?" I stepped down, closing the distance. "You look terrible. Is the fresh start not going as planned?" "You're doing this," he hissed, a flicker of his old arrogance returning through the haze of the drugs. "The lights, the sounds. You're messing with the house. I'll kill you, you old hag." He tried to lunge at me, but his balance was gone. He stumbled, his knees buckling, and he slid down to the foyer floor. I didn't flinch. I just looked down at him with the pity one reserves for a rabid dog. "You'll do nothing," I said. "You're weak. You're so weak you had to cut a woman's brake lines because you couldn't handle her leaving you. You're so pathetic you had to sell her legacy to a man like Silas just to feel important." His face went from pale to ghostly. "How do you know about Silas?" "I know everything. I know about the 20 million. I know you've already spent the deposit. And I know that in less than 48 hours, Silas is going to realize that the deed to this house isn't in your safe. It isn't in the cloud. It's right here." I pulled the original notched deed from my pocket. I held it up, and for a second, the flickering LED light caught the gold seal. "Give it to me," he wheezed, reaching out a trembling, bloody hand. "Come and get it," I challenged. He tried to stand, using the wall for support, but I hit a button on my remote. The house's high-frequency alarm, the one designed to repel intruders, chirped for just a split second. The sound, amplified by his sensitized hearing, sent him crashing back to his knees, clutching his ears and howling in pain. "I'm not the police, Andre. I'm not the court. They would give you a cell and 3 meals a day. They would give you a lawyer to argue about your difficult childhood," I said, leaning over him. "I'm not going to give you any of that. I'm going to give you exactly what you gave my daughter, a cage with no way out and a clock that's running out of time." I looked at the shattered remains of the glass he'd thrown earlier. "You have 36 hours left before Silas comes back. You have no money, no fiancé, and no deed. You're trapped in $1 million tomb, Andre, and the air is getting thinner." I turned and walked toward the kitchen, leaving him sobbing in the dark. The confrontation wasn't about a physical fight. It was about showing him that his power was an illusion. He was the prey now, and the hunter was already in the kitchen making a final pot of tea. The next morning didn't bring any light. I had programmed the smart glass windows to remain in their opaque privacy setting. To Andre, it looked like the sun had simply forgotten to rise. He was stumbling through a twilight world of $920,000 shadows, and I was the one holding the dimmer switch. I sat in the monitoring room, watching the feed. Andre was in the kitchen, frantically trying to use the landline. It was dead. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket, his thumbs shaking as he tried to dial. I clicked a button on my laptop, and the signal jammer hummed. Looking for a signal. Andre? I whispered to the screen. He threw the phone against the marble backsplash. The screen shattered, but it didn't make him feel any better. He was officially disconnected. No internet, no cellular service, no way to call for help. He was a man drowning in a sea of luxury, and I had taken away his life vest. I watched him go to the front door. He grabbed the handle and yanked. Nothing. He kicked at the reinforced glass. But these windows were built to withstand hurricanes and intruders. He was the only intruder here, and the house was holding him tight. "Let me out!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Ruby, you can't do this. It's kidnapping." I opened the intercom, my voice calm and conversational. Kidnapping is such a harsh word, Andre. I prefer to think of it as mandatory reflection. You wanted this house so badly. You killed for it. Now you get to enjoy every single square inch of it. Alone. "I'll burn it down," he threatened, his eyes darting toward the high-end gas range. "I'll torch the whole place with you in it." I chuckled, and the sound echoed through the kitchen speakers like dry leaves skittering on a grave. "Go ahead. The fire suppression system is industrial grade. You'll just end up soaking wet and smelling of smoke. And besides, if you burn the house, you burn the only thing Silas wants. Do you think he'll be more or less upset if his 20 million goes up in flames?" The mention of Silas drained the remaining color from his face. He sank to the floor, leaning against the island where Maya used to prep Sunday brunch. "What do you want?" he sobbed. "Just tell me what you want." "I want the truth to have a seat at the table," I said. "I want you to feel the walls closing in just like the metal of that SUV closed in on my daughter. I want you to count every second until that 48-hour clock hits 0. You have 24 hours left. Andre, Silas doesn't like to be kept waiting." I began to cycle the house's audio. I didn't use the crash sounds anymore. I used something much more haunting, the sound of a heartbeat. I played a steady, thumping rhythm through the subwoofers in the floorboards. Thump, 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 thump. I increased the volume just enough that he could feel it in his teeth. It was the sound of time running out. It was the sound of a life he had stolen, beating right under his feet. He began to crawl toward the library, perhaps hoping to find a weapon or another way out. But I had already rearranged the furniture in the dark. He stumbled over a chair that hadn't been there a moment ago. He ran into a wall he thought was a hallway. I was gaslighting him in the most literal sense. I was rewriting the geography of his reality. By the time the sun actually went down outside, Andre didn't know which way was north, and he didn't know if he was talking to me, to Maya, or to the devil himself. 22 hours, Andre, I broadcasted. The wolves are at the gate, and you're the only thing on the menu. The 48-hour mark was approaching like a funeral procession. The house, once a symbol of prestige, had become a sensory deprivation chamber designed to drive a man to the edge of his own soul. Andre was no longer a man. He was a heap of trembling nerves huddled in the corner of the grand foyer. He hadn't eaten, he hadn't slept, and the constant, thumping heartbeat I'd been piping through the floors had turned his mind into a shattered mirror. I watched the perimeter cameras. 3 black SUVs turned into the cul-de-sac, their headlights extinguished as they coasted toward the driveway. Silas didn't believe in being late. He was a man of business, and business required punctuality. I picked up the intercom for the final time. The guests are here, Andre. And they didn't bring a housewarming gift. Andre scrambled to his feet, his movements frantic and uncoordinated. He ran to the front window, clawing at the opaque glass, trying to see out. Ruby, open the door. Let me out. I'll give you everything. I'll confess. Just don't let them in. You already gave me everything when you took Maya, I said, my voice as flat as a dial tone. As for the confession, I don't need it. The brake line spoke for you. I reached for the master control panel. With a single swipe, I disengaged the high-security deadbolts. The heavy front doors hissed as the vacuum seal broke, swinging open to the cool night air. Silas stepped across the threshold first. Behind him stood two men whose shadows seemed to stretch across the entire neighborhood. They didn't look like they were here to negotiate. They looked like they were here to clean up a mess. Andre, Silas said, his voice terrifyingly calm. You didn't answer your phone. You didn't send the wire. And you definitely didn't finish the paperwork. Silas! Wait! Andre shrieked, falling to his knees. The old woman, she's here. She's been messing with the house. She has the deed. She's in the walls. Silas looked around the empty, silent foyer. The lights were back to normal now. The heartbeat had stopped. To a rational observer, the house was a palace of peace. Andre, on the other hand, looked like a raving lunatic, covered in sweat, eyes darting at shadows, screaming about a 60-year-old woman who wasn't in sight. The house is empty, Andre, Silas said, stepping closer. Just like your promises. We checked the records. There is no contested status. There is no paperwork moving. You played us. You used our capital to buy a playground for your mistress, and now you're trying to act crazy to avoid the bill. No, she's here. Ruby, tell them. Andre turned, screaming at the empty air. I was standing 3 feet behind Silas, hidden behind the heavy velvet drapes of the dining room archway. I could have stepped out. I could have saved him. Instead, I reached out and gently pushed a small, handheld recorder. It played a 3-second clip I'd captured earlier. Andre's own voice, clear as a bell, saying, I'll skip town with the syndicate's money once the house sells. It was a fake, a digital stitch together of his various rants, but to Silas, it was the final nail. Silas's expression didn't change, but the air in the room got colder. You were going to run, Andre, with our 20 million. I never said that. That wasn't me. It sounded exactly like you, Silas whispered. He signaled to the two men. They moved with a terrifying, practiced efficiency, grabbing Andre by the arms and dragging him toward the door. The car is waiting, Andre, Silas said. We have a lot to discuss. And since you love this house so much, don't worry. We'll make sure you're buried somewhere with a very nice view. As they dragged him out, Andre's screams echoed off the $920,000 walls. He looked back one last time, his eyes locking onto the shadow where I stood. For a split second, I stepped into the light. I didn't say a word. I just raised Maya's favorite teacup in a silent toast. The doors slammed shut. The SUVs pulled away. The silence that returned was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. The silence in the house was no longer heavy or haunting. It was a clean, hollow space where a family's history used to live. I walked through the rooms, my fingers trailing over the marble countertops and the smooth, cold glass. The scent of Andre's expensive cologne and the metallic tang of his fear were fading, replaced by the crisp, neutral scent of an empty building. There were no sirens. There were no flashing blue lights. In the eyes of the world, Andre had simply disappeared with his new girlfriend, a man fleeing his debts and his grief. I made my way to the master bedroom and opened the safe behind the vanity. I pulled out the original deed and the true, untampered while my daughter had left in my care. I didn't need to show them to a judge. I didn't need a legal battle to prove what the soul already knew. I carried the papers down to the backyard, to the edge of the stone patio overlooking the woods where Maya used to sit and dream. I struck a match. The flame was small at first, then it hungrily swallowed the forged documents Andre had tried to use against me. I watched the ashes scatter into the wind. The house was mine, but it wasn't a home anymore. It was a monument to a battle won. I had already made the arrangements. The property wasn't going to be sold for profit, and it wasn't going to be a museum. I had signed it over to a private trust that would ensure it remained untouched, a silent sentinel on this hill, while the money from Maya's insurance, the money Andre died trying to steal, was moved into accounts he couldn't even imagine. I stood there for a long time, watching the first real light of dawn break over the trees. I felt 60 years old. Yes, but I felt powerful. I had outlived the monster, outsmarted the snake, and outplayed the devils at their own game. People think age makes you soft. They think gray hair means a dimming of the fire. They are wrong. Age just gives you the patience to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Andre thought he could build a kingdom on my daughter's grave, but he forgot that the foundation of every home is the mother who protects it. He didn't lose his life to a ghost. He lost it to a woman who knew exactly which wires to pull. Now, the $920,000 house stands empty, a warning to anyone who mistakes a mother's silence for weakness. This has been the final chapter of a journey fueled by blood, bricks, and a mother's cold, hard vengeance. If you enjoyed seeing Mrs. Gable take it all back without ever calling a cop, make sure you've liked this video. Subscribe to Vintage Vengeance and hit that notification bell. We have plenty more stories where the payback is permanent and the secrets are buried deep. Before you go, comment justice below if you think Ruby did the right thing. I'll see you in the next story where the past always catches up.